If we go back to the late 80s, we see that the government of the day was sitting with several problems in this country of ours. The first problem that it faced was unemployment was very high. This was coupled to the fact that employment advertisements were prolific. Government said, how could this be? How could we have two indicators which are working against each other? If you had high unemployment, they thought, would you not have a low incidence of advertisements for jobs? So they commissioned a group within government to review the advertisements which were being displayed. When the group gave their results back to the government was very surprised. What they found was that the vast majority of positions which were being advertised were in fact calling for some sort of qualification. This led government to embark upon a program of ascertaining where Australia lay in the OECD countries, looking at qualified people per head of capita. When this was done, government was flabbergasted, because here we are, the lucky country, and we were not sitting anywhere near the top. The results showed that we in Australia had, relatively speaking, few qualified people in the workplace. So obviously these advertisements were actually calling for qualified people. Those qualified people did not exist in this country. The second problem which the government had of that day, and anybody who's watching this video who was in business in those days would understand this, was we had interest rates around 17 or 18% because of the inflation that was rampant throughout this country. Government decided that if it be we as a country were lacking in qualifications, it would embark upon a program of ensuring qualifications were laid out within our country. When it further reviewed the information, read the advertisements, it found that a large proportion of the advertisements were calling for people who were not qualified from a university, but actually qualified from what we call VET, Vocational Education Training. They were calling for carpenters, they were calling for mechanics, they were calling for all ilk of person. The government decides to have a look at why it is there is an anomaly. This is the anomaly they find. If you are a qualified doctor or dentist or lawyer or any other university qualification, then your qualification was in fact recognised throughout any jurisdiction in Australia. If you went to the university in Melbourne and you were sitting in Darwin, they recognised your qualification. However, when they came to this part called VET, it wasn't necessarily so. They found that people were qualified in one area, but not recognised in another. In fact, it got somewhat ludicrous. They found that you could have a person qualified in a particular organisation, but it wasn't recognised by any other organisation. So they decided to set up a task force and have a look in this area called VET. One of the things the task force did was to have a look to see, what does it take to be a trainer? What does it take to be an assessor in this part of industry? And lo and behold, they found that there were no standards. They found that any individual could hang a shingle out the front of their office and say they are now trainers. They found that any enterprise could simply say they are now a training organisation. And further, each of those training organisations created their own course, and that course was called Train the Trainer. And what it was their understanding, their view of what they thought ought to be within a trainer's qualification. Thus, they would issue this train the trainer qualification, which was recognised by their company, but not by any other company. To be frank, this was very cumbersome, messy, and inefficient. Government decided that it was time to fix this problem. And they decided, and by now, in the timeframes, or in the 90s, they decided the first thing they needed to do was to create a set of standards. And those standards would apply to an enterprise who wanted to be an RTO. That is to say, they would need to meet these standards before they could become an RTO. They then decided to have another set of standards. And these were a set of standards that an RTO, a registered training organisation, would need to meet to maintain their RTO licence. Once this was done, it was then decided that we need to form qualifications. These qualifications were then going to be delivered only by the registered training organisation that was licensed, and that the qualifications would be nationally recognised. To do this, government licensed 10 organisations. These organisations were called Industry Skills Councils. They were funded solely by government, and their prime job was, and remains today, to be the conduit of advice from industry into VET. They are the body that actually put together the training packages, and the training packages have within them the various qualifications. You see, a training package can be small or a training package can be large. If you go on to www.training.gov.au, through the search engine, you're able to look at the various training packages. You will find, for example, in the construction industry training package, there are something to the order of 300 different qualifications. You can go into the TAE training package, and you'll find today there are some 5 or 6 qualifications. So the training packages are different in size, but they are put together by the Industry Skills Council. We take our calendar forward, it is now 1998, and the government has approved a qualification which is known as BSZ 40198, a Certificate 4 in Workplace Training and Assessment. This was the first nationally recognised qualification for trainers and assessors. And government said, unless you hold this qualification, you may not deliver, that is facilitate, against qualifications, and you may not assess for competence. So that was the first step in providing some qualification for trainers and assessors. Now, with the due process of time and through a lot of industry consultation, it was deemed that the BSZ 40198 was simply too narrow in what it covered. It didn't go into things deeply enough, nor did it go into all the things which form the task of a trainer and an assessor within VET. Thus, in 2004, they released a qualification called TAA 40104. Now, this qualification superseded BSZ, and in fact, it was a complex web of units of competency which had to be covered in order for competency to be achieved. Through industry consultation over the ensuing 4 years, it was deemed that there were things within the TAA 40104 qualification which in fact didn't need to be there. Some of the things were deemed to have been duplicated. Some of the things were deemed sufficiently advanced enough that they should be in the diploma. Thus, in 2010, the latest qualification was issued, which is called TAE 40110, Certificate for in Training and Assessment. Now it's interesting to note, isn't it, that since the BSZ they've dropped the workplace out of the title of the qualification. And this is because training and assessment obviously can be done in a lot of different practice contexts, not just in a workplace. Now if we look at the TAE qualification, we will see today that it is made up of 10 units of competency. Now what I would like to explain to your good selves now is exactly what is in a training package, what is a unit of competency. There are certain things which are common. Every training package has qualifications within it. TAE 40110 is a qualification that comes out of the TAE training package. Every qualification has units of competency. If you think of a unit of competency, in the old language we might have called it a module, but these are units of competency. And in units we have core units, that is units which must be done, and we have elective units, that is electives which orient the particular qualification to a specific task or industry segment. Every unit of competency has elements of learning, and this can be anywhere from 3 through to 6 or 7. Every element of learning has performance criteria. Now we know that elements of learning and performance criteria, and indeed units of competency, are affected by what is called range and scope. And in a moment I'll cover off simplistically for your good selves what range and scope is. But we've looked at every qualification which has a supporting training course. Every qualification has units of competency. Every unit of competency have elements of learning. Elements of learning have performance criteria. Now it is the task of an RTO to ensure that when they are teaching that qualification, that they are covering off facilitation against all of the elements which exist within the particular unit of competency. Now there's a couple of other things about units of competency that you need to know. I suggest that you go on to training.gov.au, put in TAE 40110 in the right-hand box on the search engine and press go. Now this will show you the unit of competences which exist within that qualification. When we look at a unit of competency, it will give us some other information. It has an area which is called required knowledge and required skills. It has an area which is called evidence guide. And within there it'll have an area which is called critical aspects of evidence. And now it's the critical aspects of evidence you must make sure that you hold in your hand as an assessor. No amount of, but I did it, will do if it's in the critical aspects of evidence. You must hold hard evidence. Now let us look at a fundamental difference between a university and an RTO, that's a registered training organisation. A university is licensed by the Australian government to produce its own qualification. It produces its own qualification with its own content. And then it licenses its own assessors and trainers to facilitate that qualification. But if you think of an RTO, if you think of a university, it has a lot of very intellectually driven academics at the top. They're putting together the most comprehensive course that they can imagine. They're learned people. Now, by contrast, let us look at an RTO. An RTO is often owned by somebody like me, a business person with an interest in training and assessment. Now, there is no way that I would suggest that I have the intellectual capacities of somebody who is a PhD and the dean of a well-known university. So the government recognises that somebody like me cannot construct their own courses and cannot, therefore, licence their own trainers and assessors. Thus, they give me a training package. They tell me what a learner, that is you, what a learner should know. They tell me what evidence I must collect, and further, what evidence I could collect. They tell me how I must collect the evidence, and further, how else I could collect the evidence. They tell me what the skills and what the areas of knowledge are that you need to have. It's up to us to determine how we're going to teach you these things and how we're going to assess these things within the confines of the rules which exist within the training package. Now, if I look at a couple of things which are quite disjointed, but they will help provide you with some underpinning knowledge. Now, I'm going to draw something on the board, and I'm going to hope that it comes out on the board. Here we have a goalpost. If you cannot see it, I have a vertical line, and a horizontal line. Now, I would like you to imagine this for me. I would like you to imagine a training course which is 100% theoretical. Now, I'm sure by now you have that in your mind. Now, conversely, imagine a training course which is 100% practical. Now, can you see the difference? I'm sure you can. Now, why don't you and I, well, I guess it's going to be more me than you, why don't we plot a couple of courses on here and let's see whether we think they're more practical or more theoretical in how they would be given. Let's take the first course. We're going to teach a man how to dig a hole. Now, I know you've thought about that, and you would agree with me that there's no question this is a demonstrably practical, it's a practical course. But the question has to arise, are there any elements of theory in this course? Take a moment just to think about that. Is there any theory in a course which would be used to teach a man how to dig a hole? By now, I know you would have reached the same conclusion I have. Yes, there is. Because we would want to teach them such things as occupational health and safety. We would want to teach them such things as how to correctly use the tools. We might want to teach them such things on how to correctly measure the specifications of the hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot this. At about 75% practical and about 25% theoretical. I'm sure you'll agree with me. Let's plot a second course. Let's teach a lady how to supervise 10 men who are digging a hole. Now, the question I ask you is, there still practical teaching involved? Well, clearly there is, because the lady will need to know how to dig the hole. You would know, as I do, we can't manage somebody doing a task if we are unable to do the task ourselves. So we have a lady managing 10 men who are digging holes. The question then is there more theory? Would we put more theory into this course than what we would to the man digging the hole? Take a moment to think about that. you will have concluded the same as me, yes, we would. Because we would want to teach this particular lady, well, such things as what to do when you come across rather rock, when to switch from a shovel to some sort of device for digging it out, such as a jackhammer. We would want to teach this lady something about how to manage people. We would want to teach this person something about industrial law. What are your rights as an employer? Should a worker turn up for work affected by alcohol or affected by drugs of addiction? There would be many theoretical elements we would want to build into this course. Thus, I plot this course at about 50-50. That is, 50% will be theoretical, 50% will be practical. Now let us look at plotting a third course. I'm going to teach you how to design the course that will be used to train the men in how to dig the hole. Teach you how to design the course that will be used to train the men in how to dig a hole. The question arises, is there more theory? Well, the answer, of course, there is. We will now need to teach this person design rules, assessment rules, and all the rest of the content of TAE. Thus, I plot this. At about 75% theoretical and 25% practical. Now, if we look at this vertical line, down here, imagine that the learner has zero knowledge whatsoever of the subject. Here, they have all of the knowledge which is in the known world about that subject. The question arises, what would we call this line? Well, in VET, this line is called competence. And remember, it's not for me to determine what constitutes competence against a qualification. It's already there for me in the training package because it is competency-based training. You see, in VET, we don't have credits and passes and distinctions. That is the realm of university. In VET, we have 2 marks to determine competency. You're either competent or you're not yet competent. So if you're here when we measure the knowledge you have, then you're not yet competent. If you're here, you're competent. If you're here, you're still competent. And if you're here, you're still competent. There's no graduations of competency. There's 1 mark. So let us have a look at our 3 courses and let us see how much of this knowledge do we think each of these 3 people need to hold. Let us take the man that's digging the hole. Does he need to know all there is to know in the given world about digging holes? The answer is clearly not. He will need to know just enough to dig the hole. So if his knowledge bank fills here, that's fine. Now, our lady that's managing the 10 men, she's going to need a greater amount of knowledge. How to identify what type of rock it is, to know whether we call for a mattock, whether we in fact need an excavator, or whether a jackhammer will do. She's going to need to know, oh yes, that looks a bit like some sort of human bone. Maybe we should stop. Oh look, that pipe says gas. I don't think we should go any further. There are many things that the supervisor will need that the person digging the hole will not need. So this is not a correct point for this person. I suggest to you this person needs a lot more knowledge. Now let us look at the person who is going to design the course which is going to be used to teach the man how to dig the hole. I propose to you that this person here requires nearly all of the information and knowledge about digging holes in the known universe. And later on, should you do TAE with us and you start to get involved in the design activity, without doubt, it will be proven to you that without the knowledge, in-depth knowledge, in the depth and breadth, you would be unable to design the course. Thus, what we've in fact here is we've defined some parameters on knowledge, and we've looked at different courses, and we can see we would not approach each course in the same fashion. Within VET, we have something called learner characteristics. Now, a learner characteristic is anything which can be ascribed to an individual or a group. For example, having English as a second other language would be a learner characteristic. Having a group of people under 25 would be a learner characteristic. Having people who have never worked before would be a learner characteristic. So learner characteristics can be anything that's appropriate to an individual or to a group. And it is these characteristics which lead us to understand how we would design each course differently for those particular learners. Now, I'd like to take you to something which is called the Australian Qualification Framework. In this country, we have 10 different levels of qualification. The first level is known as the Certificate 1. And that is the lowest level that exists. The highest level of qualification in our country, it's a level 10, it's known as a PhD or a Doctor of Philosophy. Now, within the VET environment, we go up to an AQF level 8 qualification. Now, against AQF levels, we can ascribe certain learner characteristics, and this will help us in the design function. For example, let's assume that somebody is going to doing an AQF level 1 qualification. We ask you, what sort of work do you think this person would be doing? Well, I can tell you they will be doing the lowest level of work in an enterprise, and they will be new to that job. So, for example, if it was a large retail store, if the lowest level of job was stacking the shelves with product, then they would be new to the job of stacking shelves on the product. And so, taking that thought forward, I wonder, what learner characteristics would we ascribe to this person? Well, we could ask, do we think they will have high level of education? You could ask, what do you think their English spoken skills would be like? What would their reading skills be like? Would they understand complex issues and complex situations? These and many other questions you would ask to help you understand, as a TAE qualified person, exactly what you should take into account when designing the course. Now let's go to the other end of the scale. Let's look at a PhD, AQF level 10. What learner characteristics could we ascribe to a PhD? Take a moment to think about that. I'm sure you've come up with a list that's something like mine. Firstly, will they be intelligent? Secondly, will they have many years of education? Will they understand complex issues, complex problems? Would they understand how to problem solve? I ask you this question. Would you run a training course for that group of PhD people in the same fashion that you would for somebody who's at the lowest level of an enterprise? The answer is no. Your language would be different. Your activities would be different. Much of what you do would be very, very different. So part of TAE will in fact educate you as to how to take these learner characteristics into account and how to modify your design activity to best suit your learners. Another thing I would like to cover off, if I may, is the structure of VET. If I go back prior to June of 2011, VET was structured with the federal government having the top position, but because of the existence of law, we find that each of the states and each of the territories have their own registering authority. And that registering authority was responsible for issuing an RTO licence to an applicant, and then for ensuring that the RTO complied with the set of standards which existed. And the standards that existed for an RTO were 3 in number with 14 different elements. Now, this produced somewhat of a messy situation in our country. You had different state training authorities interpreting the standards and issuing certain directions to RTOs different to other states. It really was not consistent. So the federal government in 2011, through legislation, created the Australian Skills Quality Authority, ASQA. And as of June, most of 2012, I should say, most RTOs have now transferred to ASQA. Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia and Northern Territory are all involved with ASQA. WA has a slight involvement with them too. It is envisaged that by 2013, all states and territories will have transitioned to ASQA. Now, there's currently some 5,500 RTOs in this country. It is a general consensus that there are too many RTOs. Thus, ASQA are very, very much driven by the standards. ASQA has 11 standards for existing RTOs, and you can find these quite easily. All you need to do is go to ASQA, asqa.gov.au. You'll see on the top right-hand page, top right-hand side of the page, you'll see a search engine. Simply put in RTO standards, hit the go button, and the first entry you will see will be the legislation which identifies all of the standards. And you can see what it is that we have to do. I can assure you that operating an RTO can be quite an administrative nightmare. We have so many pieces of paper and documents that have to be detailed. We're subject to audit from ASQA at any point in time on any element of our business. But being an RTO provides, for me, one of the greatest fulfilling tasks I've ever had. Because we at HBA, we like to help people like you. Thank you.